swear.
You don't get to rush this.
The Last of Us is a story that needs no introduction. A game franchise that you immediately recognize even if you didn't play it. A game that is notorious for its incredible visuals, gameplay mechanics, and the part that captured the hearts of many, its story. The game was so incredible that a sequel was a no-brainer. A game that spawned an HBO show that is considered one of, if not the best video game adaptations ever. And a game that created one of the most creative and passionate fan bases I have ever been a part of. Talking about The Last of Us is so difficult nowadays. It is a game that I am extremely passionate about and could gush over for countless hours, but at the same time, so many people before me have poured their love and soul into dissecting every single pixel of this game. Ever since starting my channel, I knew for a fact that The Last of Us was going to be one of the hardest obstacles for me to tackle, because there's so much I want to talk about, and I didn't think I would be able to condense everything into a single script. But today I am here to tackle one of my favorite games of all time. Hell, it might even reach that spot after today's video. Of all the topics I listed out when beginning my script, I narrowed it down to two. Talking about Ellie's humanity decaying from the start of the first game to the end of the second, and the overall humanity of every single group I have interest in, and especially the groups of enemies we encounter in both games. Today we will be discussing the latter, but if the first option sounds interesting to you guys, then let me know. But enough with this long-winded introduction, let's go back to Austin, Texas, where this story began. As a fan of the Walking Dead franchise, not just the games but the television show especially, I have always been a fan of the zombie medium. It wasn't until I played The Last of Us that I realized just how creative writers can be when designing a horrific virus that wipes out almost all of humanity. We get our first taste of the cordyceps infection in Joel's house when we see his neighbor smashing through the glass window, trying to kill Joel and his daughter Sarah. Joel's neighbor lunges at him with no sense of self-preservation, a staple in the zombie franchise. And as we venture through the intro of one of the most beautiful stories ever told, we are force-fed the exact same message every zombie show and game is trying to deliver us. We can't always protect the ones we care about.
No. 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 Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
As we continue our playthrough through The Last of Us Part 1, we travel across the US with two main characters, being Joel Miller and his surrogate daughter Ellie Williams. Having experienced immense loss in the first minutes of the story, Joel is a man covered under a thick skin. A man that doesn't let emotion dictate his movement, and doesn't get too close to others out of the fear of experiencing the same pain he faced back when the outbreak occurred. We see just how thick the barrier Joel created for himself is, as we watch just how quickly he moved on from Tess's sacrifice. Even though we knew deep down just how difficult it was for him, the fact that Joel was able to simply ignore his loss by commanding Ellie to never talk about Tess again, shows what type of person Joel was. He was someone who pushed his problems to the back of his mind so far until they weren't his problems anymore. Ellie was a girl with a sense of misplacement. Further in the game we see her emotional outburst to Joel about how everyone she loved and cared about either died or left her. Something that was completely out of her control, as at this point in the story she was only 14. At that age, it is hard to grow up in a world that has been left in ruin. It is hard to learn that you can't always trust the people around you like you could when society was intact. Ellie struggled to find herself, and the one thing driving her forward was her immunity to the cordyceps infection. As the hope of benefiting humanity plagued her mind, it gave her a sense of purpose. It served as Ellie's motivation to keep moving forward, even after losing all of those she once had. In The Last of Us Part 1, we travel with these two characters suffering in their own right, and watching them slowly open up to one another, the idea that a teenage girl can reignite the flame of parenthood in a suffering, emotionally exhausted man who swore to never love someone like that again after facing unimaginable grief is the beauty of humanity. As humans, we are able to communicate, feel, and express our emotions, and The Last of Us Part 1 shows us that no matter how deep of a hole you are thrown into, with the help of others, there is always a person that will extend their hand to you. Ellie brought Joel to new places, reconnected him with people he used to care so much for, and introduced him to a new world where he was once again allowed to love and protect those he cared about. Joel's story is a beautiful one, and it makes the player feel amazing seeing two characters better themselves together, as they once barely even spoke a word to each other, to now hearing them enjoy Ellie's crappy jokes together.
We need to lighten the mood. Ready? It doesn't matter how much you push the envelope, it'll still be stationary.
But Naughty Dog at the end of the first game reminds us that no matter how beautiful a story is, this world that they have written us into is still absolutely disgusting. No matter how far you move forward, there will always be events out of your control that further prove Joel's original mentality, that when you get too close to others, you will suffer because of it. When Joel learns that Ellie has to be sacrificed for the sake of humanity, the statistical choice is clear. Sacrifice one for billions. It is only natural to make that difficult choice. Although many of you are nodding your heads right now agreeing with the statistical outlook, who are the Fireflies that they are able to choose who lives and who dies? Why are they allowed to kill someone they don't know for the sake of those they do know? Joel doesn't know any of the people who will get this new vaccine, so why is it that Joel has to sit there and shut up as they are killing the one person who brought Joel from the world of surviving to the world of the living once again? The simple answer to it all is that Joel has the power to save the person he loves now. This isn't like Sarah, where it was out of his hands. He now has the ability to save the person he loves so much in order to preserve his humanity. In order to save Ellie, he will destroy the rest of humanity in order to get there.
Animal!
Carrie, shut the hell up. Come on, baby girl. I got you. I got you. Oh, shit.
Let me pose you a question, my dear viewer. What exactly would you do in this situation? I know there are a great majority of you thinking to yourself right now that you would never do such a thing in your life. But put yourself in the shoes of Joel Miller. You lost your entire world and survived day to day with nothing to live for, but rather survived for the sake of surviving. Unable to enjoy the presence of others, unable to enjoy the food you got to eat, and unable to enjoy the sun pouring on your face on a beautiful day. And gradually, you let a person back into your life that brings back your joy, brings back your ambition, and drive to live, not survive. That person becomes your world. Now someone is trying to rip them away from you. If you answer that you would let them go, you are lying to yourself. No human in the world would be able to let someone like that go in the first place, let alone for a second time. Joel saved his humanity at the expense of others, and it was absolutely revolting. My job today for the rest of this video is to tackle how other groups in The Last of Us preserve their humanity. What exactly they clung on to, and how they dealt with this feeling of meaninglessness in a world slowly rotting away. Starting with the Federal Disaster Response Agency, better known as FEDRA. These people served as what we knew as the military, imposing martial law in quarantine zones, involving strict control over civilians and harsh punishment. In a way, Fedra was a military dictatorship. They ran their cities by placing harsh rules on people, allowing for no freedom of expression, along with walls that not just kept infected out, but kept the people in. They clung onto this sense of power to maintain their humanity. The idea that the soldiers were maintaining what would be our stand-in for laws in the real world kept them sane. The idea that I am executing this person in front of the city for the sake of upholding the rules that I made to keep the people I love safe, and to set an example for any other people who choose to go against us. By trying to maintain order, they often became authoritarian and abusive. The idea that as a soldier you are able to have leverage over normal people, sure, is a corrupt way of running society, but it is what kept Fedra soldiers alive, and gave them a sense of purpose. But of course with a military dictatorship comes rebellion, which brings us to the most iconic group in the story, the Fireflies. The Fireflies are a group that could be labeled as naive and overly optimistic, by apocalyptic standards. A rebel group opposing Fedra aiming to restore democracy and to find a cure. Introduced to us at the beginning of the story, we watch as the Fireflies worked against Fedra's authoritarian style by launching terrorist attacks on them to further push the rebellion. That in and of itself sounds counterintuitive. Launching violent attacks to stop violence doesn't seem like the smartest decision, but in a zombie apocalypse, it's all that people are taught to do. That's all they know to do at this point. In order to cling on to reality, the Fireflies have a strong grasp on idealism, and hoping rather than accepting the sad state of the world, aiming to cure it. The reason I believe the Fireflies were naive is the reason why Joel was able to wipe out the entire hospital to begin with. They believed everyone would drop everything and support their cause. They never accounted for the fact that taking away the life of someone else would be their overall downfall. While most would say it's stupid to account for something like that, in a world as disgusting and horrific as The Last of Us, it is important to account for human emotion, not just statistical reasoning. The members of the Fireflies use their motto, "Look for the light," and their signature dog tags to further hang on to that idea of humanity. The dog tags provided members with reassurance that they were part of something greater, and would be remembered as such. Little did they know that rather than being remembered as heroes for saving humanity, their names would end up in the never-ending void that is Joel's backpack. Before we move on to the Hunters, specifically the ones we faced in Pittsburgh, I want to take the time to talk about Bill for a bit. As we know, Bill served as a mirror to Joel, a possible future for Joel if he continued down his path of isolation and disconnection from human emotion. He would become someone who isolated himself from society, someone who would talk to himself for enjoyment, and spend time working on small destructive projects in order to have something to do. It isn't until we see Frank's body that we realize Bill was on the exact same path as Joel was, albeit a bit quicker. We learn that Bill was once a very caring man, a guy that cared deeply about his partner Frank, and Frank was the man that kept Bill sane. A person he cared about more than anything, similar to how Joel loved Sarah. It isn't until Bill lost Frank that he became a man flooded with aggression, and fear of feeling that way again. I believe Frank's influence kept Bill's humanity alive. In his time of isolation, despite how many would perceive him, there was a reason why he rescued Joel and Ellie from the horde of infected, instead of leaving them to die to continue his isolated lifestyle. Once we find Frank's goodbye to Bill, we see Bill begin to heal himself with the closure he needed, knowing that despite having someone he cared about, it wasn't really a weakness, but rather someone who made him softer in all the right ways. Preserving his humanity along with his heart. We never see Bill again, but I would like to believe he found new people to support him, and with Frank's influence, he let them back into his life, just as Joel did with Ellie. As we discuss the Hunters from Pittsburgh, I want to openly compare them to the community in Jackson, also known as Tommy's group. I believe these two groups of people serve as direct parallels to one another, as on one hand, the Hunters completely abandoned their humanity in favor of survival. By overthrowing Fedra, they formed a violent anarchist group who abandoned morality. by raiding, ambushing, and killing travelers to survive. I think many of us forget that these enemies are people as well, with their own stories to tell and their own families to protect. None of these people want to die, but we kill endless hordes of them in order to continue our mission. The world of The Last of Us has forced these people into a sense of desperation, where they learn that the strong live and the weak die, leading them to abandon their moral compasses in exchange for survival. In direct contrast, however, Jackson is a group that formed as a cooperative, sustainable settlement with defenses, electricity, and farms. Although not free of conflict and not completely foolproof, Jackson was a community built off of sustainability. Even though there may be conflict between members of the community, as we see at the beginning of the second game, the people of Jackson believe in hope, not of curing this world of its disease, but rather coexisting with the tragedy. They maintain democracy, kindness, and a sense of family and peace. We know that this is not foolproof though. As we see at the beginning of the second game, Joel's kindness he learned from Jackson eventually becomes his downfall. The last group I am going to discuss about part 1 is going to be David's group, also known as the Cannibal group. Initially introduced to us as normal survivors, we later find out that they have resorted to cannibalism and cult-like behavior in order to hold on to some sense of hope in survival. This group I would describe as completely lost their sense of humanity, hiding their actions under a false image of decency, even to the point of exploiting children with pedophilic tendencies. Probably one of the worst paths a group can go down in order to survive in this world. Inventing sick and twisted solutions to their problems simply for the sake of survival is something that no one would be able to execute unless forced by their animalistic urges. The hunger and desperation David's people endured allowed them to go down this path without their humanity and morals holding them back. This brings us to the end of part 1. Honestly, one of the reasons I enjoyed this game so much was just watching to see how the writers imagined different people, and how they would cope with the idea of a zombie apocalypse. Whether for better or for worse, none of the ideals or motivations the people had seemed out of the question, or even baseless. Whether it be trying to hang on to idealism as the Fireflies did to cure the world, or completely abandoning the idea of morality as David and his group did. All of the paths were clearly paved, and how they made the decisions were completely human. As we move on to the second game, we will be encountering more interesting groups in their motivations and how they directly mirror or contrast from Ellie. In 2020, Naughty Dog delivered us one of the most anticipated games of all time, The Last of Us Part 2. With its release, the community had completely differing opinions on this game. Whether you were in the band of people who were upset Joel was killed in the first hour, or if you were like me, a person who was upset but rather understanding of the writer's artistic choice of killing him. We are all victims of Naughty Dog's writing. They wanted us to be upset. They wanted us to be angry while playing through this game. As we play through Ellie's half of the game, we continue the story through hatred, and that is exactly what Part 2 is. While the first game is a story about love and what love can do to restore a man's humanity, Part 2 is about hatred and what hatred can do to destroy someone's humanity. As we move through Ellie's half, we watch our beloved Ellie turn from a little girl we knew in Part 1 into the mindless killer that Joel was when she was saving Ellie from the Fireflies. Ellie hated Joel after finding out what actually happened at the hospital, and swore she would never understand why he did it. But in reality, her quest for revenge was exactly the same as Joel's quest for humanity. He was willing to kill billions for the sake of preserving his world, and Ellie was willing to kill billions for the sake of avenging her world. Ellie's revenge story in The Last of Us Part 2 is genuinely disgusting. We watch as her humanity slowly degrades, and as the player continues with the story, rather than supporting Ellie's motive, our humanity as the player slowly brings her actions into question. Is beating Nora with a pipe for information worth it? Is killing a pregnant lady worth this revenge when we have our own to take care of? Is killing a dog trying to protect its owners worth it? But unfortunately for us, even if we are questioning her motives, we are forced to watch Ellie continue this quest of revenge, until we see just how far she is willing to go to achieve her goals. But suddenly, The story is flipped on its head.
Dad? Dad? Dad! Come on.
To many of the fans' dismay, Naughty Dog chose to force the player to look at the story of revenge in a new light. We take the place of Abby, aka Joel's killer, and learn exactly why she did what she did. Surprise, surprise, another story of revenge that places Ellie's into question. If Abby did all of this for revenge, wouldn't Ellie be continuing this endless cycle of death in order to enact her own revenge? As if this wasn't enough, we played the next half of the story as Abby, learning about her struggles, her accomplishments, her humanity. And by the end of it, we learned that Abby isn't so different from the characters we loved in the first game. She is also a struggling survivor that found her reason to live by caring for other people, namely Lev. Lev restored Abby's humanity. Despite Ellie murdering all of her friends, Lev kept Abby grounded at the end of the game, just like Ellie did for Joel in the first. Lev prevented Abby from becoming the monster Ellie had shaped her out to be by stopping Abby from killing Dina. Years after the conflict, when faced with the opportunity of revenge once again, Ellie accepts the offer and abandons her humanity for the sake of revenge. At this point, on the brink of death, Abby does not care for revenge any longer, but rather only cared for the one person who represented her drive and her world. Abby fought Ellie at the end of Part 2 to preserve her world, the person who maintains her humanity. Even on the brink of death, Abby was still willing to fight until her last breath, and even though she failed, Joel was the person who saved Abby at the very end. By appearing in Ellie's mind at the final moment, Joel brought Ellie back into the world worth living in, rather than a world worth surviving in. As Naughty Dog had set out to do, they wanted to tell an absolutely horrific story filled with hypocritical motivation and disturbing moral decisions. But the issue of this story is why I believe The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece in video game history, is how human all of the characters' motivations are. I am aware of how many times I have used the word human and humanity in this video, and I apologize for the redundancy, but this is genuinely the main theme of these stories. Every group is human in their own right, and all of the choices these characters make are human, no matter how disturbing or messed up. I would like to talk about the groups we encounter in this game as well, similar to how we did in the first. From the WLF to the Rattlers, we will discuss all that is worth discussing, starting back at Jackson. Welcome back to Jackson. We are greeted to a thriving community even more stable and structured than before. With patrols and communal living, similar to the first game, the community of Jackson serves as its own hope, a symbol of living rather than surviving, built upon integrity and compassion. This way of living isn't without its downfalls, however. As we see from Joel living comfortably, it softened him up, making him less cautious, a trait you don't want to lose in a world like this. Jackson is a trusting community. Tommy offered help to Abby's group and it ended up getting his brother killed. No matter how you slice it, as perfect as Jackson seems, all communities have their downfalls that apply to real life along with this world. That said, Jackson is a glimpse of what the world used to be. People have jobs that resemble those of the old world, and people are allowed to relax and allowed time to mourn for those that they've lost, as we see by the graveyard at the beginning of the game. Moving on to the Washington Liberation Front, or the WLF for short, also known as the Wolves, a militarized group that overthrew Fedra in Seattle and built an army. Similar to Fedra, the Wolves viewed themselves as protectors, often using brutal tactics and becoming war-hardened soldiers. Similar to Fedra, the Wolves became corrupt and lost sight of what exactly they were protecting. Rather than striving to protect humans from infected, they worked to protect humans from other humans, often using brutal tactics to squash outsiders who they deemed to be enemies. Similar to Jackson, the Wolves were developed and sustained with their food, electricity, and societal norms. But rather than providing a glimpse towards the past, they focus more on becoming an unstoppable community to stomp out any and all threats that opposed them. The WLF's biggest enemy in Part 2 is a group known as the Seraphites, or as outsiders call them, Scars. They are a religious cult that lives in nature, rejecting modern life in exchange for more primitive weaponry and technology. In theory, the religion promotes non-violence and being one with nature, but when it comes to dealing with threats to the cult, all Seraphites are willing to sacrifice their morals to protect the religion that is promoting said morals. In order to preserve their humanity, Scars devoted themselves to the idea of religion, even going as far as to sacrifice other innocent people who are simply outsiders to the religion. No longer promoting peaceful living, but rather killing those unknowing of their primitive actions, they started off with spiritual goals in mind, but slowly became violent, dogmatic, and brutal to outsiders. Similar to David's group, we are introduced to a new group that sacrifice humanity for the sake of survival, that being the Rattlers. Introduced near the conclusion of the game, they are people who relied on slave labor, and can only be described as sadistic raiders living in Santa Barbara. These people have completely lost their morals in exchange for capturing, torturing, and enslaving survivors, to make their lives easier and keep them entertained. In a world full of suffering, taking advantage of the suffering of others is all they can do to benefit their lives. While completely disgusting, it's understandable how they got to this point, despite the horrible choices they were forced to make due to the circumstances. Finally, the last group I'm going to discuss today are the Firefly remnants we learn about at the end of Abby's story. Scattered after the hospital incident, many of the Fireflies tried to regroup in Santa Barbara with the hope of rebuilding a path to a cure. Still clinging onto their old mission, while still naive and immensely optimistic, I think we can all agree that it is beautiful how dedicated these characters are to restoring the memory of a normal world. Out of all of the groups discussed today, I believe that the Fireflies and Jackson are the two groups that managed to preserve their humanity in the most morally correct way possible. Although not completely clean, as it's impossible in this horrific world, they try their best to preserve what they once had, while adapting to the world they find themselves in, and it's beautiful. The Last of Us is a game series that has stuck with me for years and will continue to be with me for years to come. It is a game I could continue gushing about for hours and hours and keep replaying over and over again for the sake of it, just because of how amazing the story is. Don't get me wrong, the story is absolutely disgusting and horrific, but at the end of the day it is human, and that's what makes The Last of Us special. I would like to thank you for making it so far into this video with me. I cannot wait to see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.